we had a couple of challenges, bringing in war and trust at the back, and also the impact of what's happening on poor people. And I think there are some other questions as well about not just land value tax, but other kind of taxes as well there. So would someone like to respond to those? Yeah.
I didn't mention war, though I'm perfectly aware that that's how many of these crises have been solved in the past, and I've written about it. And I certainly did think that I said something about the capture of the Bank of England and the Treasury by the banking system. I'm sorry you missed it.
Sorry.
War. What is war? War is one group of the 1%, if you want to call them that, although I'll bow to Fred's genius in understanding it's not just the 1%. The 1% in our country makes you a slave because they capture rents, the rents of natural resources, lands, government-granted monopolies. What's war? That's stealing the elite of another country's rents. That's what war is. It's our using our force to get a hold of the rents so we can enslave another population to us. But we're still enslaved. And that's all war. Until we recognize that what war's really about is stealing the resources of another country. And that's also, for me being an environmentalist, stealing our future generations' resources, because that's what we do when we harm the environment. That's all that war is. It's perfect with the thesis that Carlo and Fred said. It's just a means of nicking other people's land, natural resources, and their labor. It's all about theft of our labor and our efforts. And that's what rent is. Rent is just a pyramid. It's a way the very wealthy and lots of other people who subscribe to that system of rent, you buy to let landlords, they subscribe to it because they get money for doing nothing, for abusing and enslaving those around them. And that's all that rent is. So if you want a solution to the problem of poverty, you want a solution to the problems of war, what you have to say is that natural resources, the rents of land, the ability to pollute, is everybody's property. It's not a few people's property. Otherwise, there's such an amount of money to destroy the environment. There's such amount of money to be made by going in and nicking oil from another country for those tiny minority at the top. That's what war's about. And that's what environmental destruction's about. It's about stealing what belongs to us all. And we're all slaves and will be forever more slaves until we learn to share rents, until we start taxing the value of land, taxing environmental pollution, taxing the very things that make us wealthy in the future, but the very things, the ground, the soil, the natural resources. It's where our taxes should come from. And by doing that, we take away the reason, the perverse incentive for people to go to war, the perverse incentive to destroy our children's environment. So that's what this whole system's about. Taxing land, taxing natural resources will allow us to have more jobs, but it'll allow us to have enough money to make sure the poor man in that house, on that terrible social system we've devised, because the incentive is for political lobbyists to tell our politicians to enact these policies to make that poor man in his tiny little house even more in poverty so they can enrich themselves. It's a systematic thing. I come from a statistical background, population and genetic modeling, and it tells me that our problems are systemic. We can work them out there mathematically, but we're not allowed to talk about that in economics, because economics is voodoo. You can't use a proper hypothesis, scientific hypothesis, because they don't want to know the result. They just want to know how to pocket their cash.
I was just going to add very simply that civilization is the product of organization. And if it wasn't for surpluses, if it wasn't for the fact that we can organize and use information and energy and resources in a way that allows us to buy extra time, which then allows us to spend, you know, our time on frivolous things from culture and art. I mean, that is what really defines humanity. And the reason I mention that is because fundamentally, what I think is missed a lot of the time when I come to these sort of things is that this crisis in particular is one of excess capacity. It's a deflationary crisis. It is not an inflationary one. That means we have too much stuff, too much productive capital that can't be distributed, because if you distributed it, prices would crash and go to zero, which would undermine the whole logic of the system. So we create artificial scarcities and we allocate capital wherever there is a potential artificial scarcity that can't be undermined. Land is very convenient because there's only a finite amount of land. And so is Bitcoin, so is gold, and pretty much anything that is fabricated and scarce and that we can create a propaganda cult market in. Now, the connection to war is simply that in an excess capacity environment, it's hugely economically stimulating to get rid of that excess capacity. And there's no better thing than war to crash a few factories and get us, you know, being active and encouraging us to organize ourselves again. And really, we must be mindful of that, I think, when we analyze empire. I mean, there's a really great sketch by Eddie, well, it's not a sketch, it's like Eddie Izzard makes a really nice point about property rights. At the end of the day, property rights are established because of the cunning use of flags in peace way, when it's peaceful. When it's not peaceful, when cunning use of flags doesn't work, we bring out the guns. But what maintains that flag's, power is the cultivation of a population that is very happy to not basically fight for a better distribution of the capital.